Good. So I've dropped in a standing item for the MPP release check-in. So at least in the multi-cluster gateway controller side, we're closing out some final issues. We're pretty close at this point. I think Thursday or Friday will be effectively complete. Most of the work we're doing now is relatively minor things. Not too many code changes landing, but a couple. So to that end, once we actually have stuff closed out, we will create a release. That release process is going to be somewhat ad hoc for this first release, but it will effectively include creating a release branch, getting builds of the images, updating the various pieces manifests to reference the new images, and then tagging that as RC1 or whatever we want to tag it. I've also started putting together a test plan. You should have access to that doc. I shared it with Kuadrant. So there's nothing super secret in there. It's just bullet point things that we want to test. And I'm in the process of transcribing those into GitHub. That's a bit of a labor-intensive job, so we definitely want to improve that process. But yeah, I think it captures most of what we want to test. If you've got other stuff that you feel should be in there, please comment and add it. Yeah, so that's it. Yeah, that's the MGC side of things. I was chatting with Guy and Alex earlier. So auth policy v2, we know that we're waiting on that, but we're hoping that it will land sometime next week. And I guess the high-level plan at this point is that we'll execute our test plan against the release, which will include the. So yeah, this is a question that I have, I guess, in general. So Quadrant's service protection. Are we going to have a new release of that this week in order to pick up like the rate limit policy changes and things like that? Or is there already a release with the rate limit policy v2 changes in it that we could pick up?
I mean, I can give some feedback on that because I was just in a call. So we need to release things from limited or upwards to do that. And I said last week that we're in a state to do the release. I believe we are. I'm just going to push Didi under the bus because he's been doing quite some good work in limited door, but I think we're at a stage where I think we should leave it where it is and not include the stuff that he's working on right now because it raises interesting questions that I think we should discuss in this call at some point. Yeah, we were in a call like just before, so he knows. Because it's exactly what I'm just sort of repeating myself from the previous call. So yeah, so TLDR from that, I think we're in a state to do it, and I could start together with Didi at some point. Now, is it in the call? Start cutting releases for that part of the tree, if that makes sense. I don't see anything that's against it, let's say, from there, and I don't think we have anything from there from the auth policy in the Quadrant operator that would be an issue. Neither in the WASM shim or whatever. So I think, as far as I know, yes, we absolutely can.
Awesome. Okay, so I think that basically unblocks our side as well, because then we can use that. So I spoke to Didi on Slack, but I was suggesting that we have a stable channel in Operator Hub where, we're not just releasing nightlies too, but like the actual blessed releases or whatever go there. So basically, if we had, yeah, go for it, Alex.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt at all. But so yeah, I think that's a very good idea. So are we talking about cutting like an RC at this stage? That's what I would do, but willing that we
Yeah.
don't do it. And if that's what we do, then would that go to stable? Again, I would argue for yes. And
Yes.
I'm done.
So yes and yes for both of those. We may adapt that like in the future potentially, but for now I think that's fine. That way we won't accidentally. I'll come to you in 1 second, Didi. That way we won't accidentally sort of start installing like newer builds, and we've kind of got a one release channel. Whether we call it stable, whether we call it something else, that's kind of up to us. Didi?
Yes. So what I was mentioning that of course, it's going to be for the operators that we have. And the moment in the Kuadrant operator, it is, I think it's like fairly easy to change to introduce at the time of that we are sure and we want to manually trigger one of the releases, we can specify the channel there. So if it's a release candidate, we can put it in a different channel or different channels, plural. And for the releases, just pick stable and just go for it.
We could probably
I've seen that there's like the issue created for the Kuadrant operator, but I think that you also meant to do it for Limitador and Authorino. Am I correct?
Yeah, I'd say just clone it over if you want. Like we want pin versions, right? We don't want to accidentally be pulling in like beyond this release, right? There's also we need to think about upgrading and things like that at some point, right? So you don't want like a set of releases in a channel that you can't really upgrade to because they're just like ad hoc nightlies or whatever. So that release channel, whether we call it release and stick with that, up for debate, like I said, but some channel where like, you can go from this version to this version. So we would want to, we definitely would want to pin Limitador operator and what was it on Authorino operator and Kuadrant operator, so that we can then from the MGC side install from that channel via OLM, and that then we should pick up the latest stable release. Does that make sense, Didi?
Yep.
Okay. So I think all that we need is for that stable channel to be there. And then when we create the subscription, we just need to change the channel name that we use. And then we'll automatically just pick up the latest in that channel, as I understand it from OLM. We don't need to specify any particular version at that point. It will be the latest released, or the latest build in set of images in that channel. Okay, that's cool. All right, so that means that like we'll basically, release candidate might be a little bit of a stretch, but we'll have a set of builds that we can start testing, minus the auth policy v2 stuff. We'll go through our test cases. We'll leave out stuff to do with auth policy, do as much of everything else as we can. And then when auth policy lands, new builds go to stable. We probably run through installation again, just to re-verify that it's all still working as expected, and then test auth policy, and then we're kind of done, right? So, any comments or thoughts on that? Does it all make sense? Okay, cool. So I'm going to keep fleshing out these test cases. The idea will be that after this week we start on that, but also as test cases complete, I can imagine that some engineers are starting to get freed up, especially because like software is so awesome and there won't be any bugs. If engineers start to get like freed up, the idea is that you would pick one of these test cases that is automatable and start automating it. So like we have some test cases covered in automation, but let's use this as an opportunity to increase that, so that we don't have to do less manual testing next time. Guy?
Yeah, quick comment on those test cases. The ones I laid out for the old policy V2 there, they are from the perspective of the old policy, right? So I think it makes sense for one wants, enough coverage for the kind of thing that you can do with an old policy. However, because the core part of the old policy is actually defined in another TRD, which is the altering alt config, and that one we are changing quite significantly. I didn't want to bring all the different use cases we may have for an alt config, to the level of the alt policy. That's why I try to vary only on the things that actually belong to the alt policy, or what makes it different from the alt config. But I think it would also be helpful if we could make some joint effort for testing the use cases we have for the alt config. Effectively, okay. I'm inviting people to help if they can on the different user guides, on following the different user guides we have for Alt3, with the changes introduced with alt config v1 beta 2.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, because it's like you said, it's a significant change to that component, which has its own API. How will we get visibility on those, Guy? Like, how should we engage with that?
I mean, easiest or quickest way I see right now is check out the pull request, which I can link here in the document. The pull request includes the changes in all the user guides, meaning I'm upgrading the examples of the alt config custom resources there to v1 beta 2. So if you just pick any one of those user guides and try to follow it, and it should work.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Anything else on release and testing for this week? I think there's just one thing that I would mention, which is as you're going through test cases, make sure if you hit a bug to actually log a bug and link it back to that test case so that we can track issues relatively easily. That's a relatively minor thing. I think most of that is captured in that doc as well. Right, moving on. Dave Martin.
Yeah. So this is something I'll be starting to do pretty soon, on and off. I just want to make sure I'm not stepping on anyone's toes. That's why I'm bringing it up here. Also looking for any extra ideas. So I noticed that from time to time, say mainly on the Gateway API Slack, some of us might jump in when someone's asking something around some policy stuff that's relevant, that we might be doing something in Kuadrant. And what I'm thinking is it'd be good to follow up with them. I don't mean directly in the thread, because we are doing that. I'm thinking go back to them at some point and directly message them, for example, try to understand their use case and capture it somewhere. We can capture in these notes, for example. Possibly even invite them onto our community call if they feel like sharing their use case here. I think so. This is based on what I've seen a couple of people that run the Grafana operator community call have done, and that seems to have worked really well to kind of get more users in Slack and also users of the operator itself. So that's what I'm thinking of starting pretty soon. So is anyone else doing that? And if they are, I just want to make sure I don't do the same thing as them and reach out to the same people. And then the other question, are there other ways, or are there other places where people are engaging other than Slack? So just throw that out there.
One thing is to, for sure, also look at the old Kuadrant Slack, because there are still people joining that one. So there's quite some people there, actually a lot more than on our new Slack.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, how many users are there on the old Kuadrant Slack?
I think it's almost 70,
Yeah,
Okay.
69.
including ourselves. Yeah.
Okay, I can go back through some of the history as well, just to see if there's anyone that might be worth reaching out to, just see how they're getting on, you know?
Yeah, of course, we don't have much history there because it's a free account. That's the nice thing of the new Slack.
Yeah.
Dave, do you
And
mean,
also,
like,
go on, yeah?
did you mean like actually DM people from like the Kubernetes Gateway API Slack that we've been talking with to tell them or to try and expand on their use cases, like as in directly message
Yes,
them?
exactly, yeah. And see if they're actually looking to use Quadrant, see if they're interested in sharing their use case in a bit more detail, or possibly even coming onto this call to share with this group.
Okay.
And then I think this group could get a lot out of that. That's what I'm thinking.
Okay. Cool. I don't think anybody else is doing that.
No, we don't shit our pants probably.
Well, I've replied a fair bit in like actual Gateway API Slack in sort of publics, but not directly to people. Yeah, interesting.
Well,
Slack
it
direct
depends.
sales.
If there's a good context that you read somebody's message somewhere and you think, oh, he might be, you can have a story around it. I think it's okay. But
Yeah.
if it's just cold spamming, yeah, sure.
It's like cold call.
A little bit, but also trying to build up the community a bit, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah.
Like I said, it seems to be one of the main things that worked well in the Grafana operator Slack channel. So I'll be chatting on and off with Peter Braun, who's one of the main people on that since it started. And like they have nearly 1,500 people on their Slack and have lots of users of the operator as well. So I think there's a lot we can try and emulate from that one. Given that I'm familiar with him, so let's see if it sticks.
On that front as well, I was thinking, well, I don't know if we can do it, but putting together a blog post, it would be on the Red Hat blog, but that's something that potentially we could share that would kind of give a high level overview of what it is that could be shared with people, maybe. And then like some kind of presentation that we could maybe bring to SIG Gateway API to talk about how we've used policy attachment. Was the other one that I was thinking about.
I know
how we've used policy
Paul
attachment.
is working on a presentation for CNCF, so that might be something we could reuse from that if we wanted to present it to Gateway API.
I was just thinking with Gateway API, like I think it might be useful to come with like something that's like valuable to them too, right? Like our experience with policy attachments and like what we've done with it and our use cases and things like that, as a way of like, I don't know, sharing our experience, but also raising the visibility of Quadrant in that community.
Last thought on this one. If anyone has been chatting to anyone about any aspect of Quadrant stuff, they can give me the name of that person. I don't mind following up with them as well, just to see if they're interested in sharing more detail. So yeah, if you know anyone, just give us a shout.
I think the other thing that comes to mind, Dave, is open cluster management. Like a lot of those people are actually Red Hat people too, so they might give us a little more airtime potentially. But talking about our use case, multi-cluster gateways defined via the OCM hub and distributed via the OCM hub might be something that's at least interesting to them. It might not necessarily get them using it, but it might be some way interesting to that community.
I get what you're saying. So I'd see two different approaches there. One is kind of outreach, trying to grow with two other communities to make them aware of what we're doing. There might be a knock-on effect of some of them showing interest, and they may say join our Slack or something like that. This, I guess, that the point of this one is more so the people who have shown interest. Let's follow up. Let's understand a bit more what they were trying to do. Let's capture their use cases and let that guide us in our upstream decisions. That's kind of where I'm coming from. But yeah, in terms of what you're suggesting, there can be a lot of value to that too. Yeah.
I suppose it's like two different things, isn't it? One is like you said, following up with existing, but the other is like creating new interest.
Yeah.
On the following up with existing, maybe one more possible small number of people to look at is we had some external contributions to, I think has only been Autorino, but like there, if you go through GitHub, you can see some people contributed. Might be also, also just nice to reach out to them to see if they had bigger plans or just like, I don't know why they contributed, but might be another group.
That's something that maybe I can help with.
I was waiting for you to say that.
All right. Is that everything on that one, Dave?
Yeah, I'd say it'll be an ongoing thing. I hope it would be. And if anyone else has any ideas, more than happy to work with them on it.
Okay, we have some items in our backlog. I don't want to just throw people into the bus. So is there somebody here that wants to talk about one of these items? I have one that I'm happy to talk about, but I don't want to take priority. Yeah, Paul?
Hey, so this one hopefully will be relatively quick, and it's in relation to the architecture proposal documents that we have right now. So some time ago, we agreed that we should look to try and migrate any pre-existing architectural documents or proposals from the different repositories such as MGC and instead migrate them over to the official architecture repository. So I took a look at one or two of them, and I know Craig, you also had a look at some of them as well. But when looking at the multi-DNS provider support one that Mike wrote, I was migrating that over, and when I spoke to Mike, he was of the opinion that the implementation had already been done, and the way it had been implemented was not necessarily drastically different, but it was still quite different to what had been initially proposed. And I guess at that point, then the question was whether or not it's worth looking to migrate it. So the options there that we had in front of us were to try and do the work to update the proposal doc itself to accurately reflect what had been implemented, and then move it over to the architecture repository, leave the proposal doc in its current state and migrate over to the architecture repo just for recording and audit purposes. Or do we just look to not migrate the proposal doc at all and perhaps double check to see that our official documentation covers what was initially proposed for that multi-DNS provider support? So that's just one example, but I guess just a high level question really around those architectural documents. Some of them I think can be easily ported over, but not all of them, and what it is we'd like to do with those ones that are a little bit more complex.
Yeah. So there's obviously, Thomas, go ahead.
Yeah, no, my 2 cents. I don't think we have to rewrite history. I don't think that's useful at all. I think we should focus on what's still coming. What the ones that are still relevant. And I think like if you go to why do we want it in one place? I think the main motivation is just to have a transparent process for an upstream community to get new features in, and how would you go about that, right? And I don't see that there's a lot of value in trying to rework existing things to fit that. I'd rather see us putting the time in for new ones to do it all in the same way. That's my 2 cents.
Thanks.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add to that, like the other added value was the recording of how we got to consensus and things. So I would even argue the other way around. If that's currently recorded elsewhere, though arguably given the outcome is not the one that was used, I don't know how much value there is really in things there, but like it's to keep that recording, right? So porting things for the sake of porting them, I don't know if it helps a lot, because it sort of defeats, and as Thomas said, right, there was a purpose behind this. So if it defeats the purpose, maybe it's no worth the effort.
I would think keeping the doc around, but maybe an option of, I don't know if this is in the RFC, Alex, already, but like a status as in like implemented or no longer relevant or something, something along those lines to say what status that proposal now has.
So yeah, the certainly can do that, but yeah, so that's the thing that confused a few people. The idea, so there's the reference to the PR itself, which sounds maybe weird, but once it gets merged, right, you want to have that link back to those discussion, and then it's supposed to be a master issue, right, for tracking the work, and that's I think what you're referring to, where like it's ongoing, and that should be it. There is an issue common thing that's supposed to be the link to the GitHub issue that tracks then the actual work. That's the indirection there, right? So that, it could be there ready to be worked on forever and nobody does anything with it. And you start working on it and one day you click it and all the work's done and it's done, or it's been discontinued or whatever.
So the thing is like that I kind of like the history of that stuff there, because even that multiple DNS provider support one, like I actually referenced back to that when I was talking to the OpenShift networking team, because inside that was reasons why we didn't use external DNS at that time. So it's actually good to sort of hold on to some of that information. Whereas like if we got rid of it later on, I'd be like, why did we not go with external DNS? Oh, I can't remember. So I think it is useful to have them there, but yeah.
Sorry, what is there now? Because now I'm a bit lost, right? So I think wherever this, where is there? Having them there where?
Oh, having them in the architecture repo, sorry. Like migrating them.
Okay, but just exactly. Like, so I'm not against it, but we need to migrate that history, right? That discussion that you were talking about. Just to migrate the end result of the doc, and then what I think I heard is what the outcome was anyways what's not in the doc. I think that defeats all the purposes. But if we can carry over the discussions, the whatever, and not lose that, then I think yes, then that is useful, because that's one of the main purposes of this whole thing.
Or just create an issue in the corrector repository, just linking to the old one, and that's it. I mean, if there's a whole thread of conversations, then I don't know what it looks like. So
yeah, so it sounds to me like you're suggesting, Alex, that we leave it where it is because it's no longer relevant to move it, but we still want the reference to it.
Yeah, so wherever it goes, wherever it is in the end, I really don't care, for as long as if it gets moved, that it's in a non-lossy way. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, if however we achieve that, and I'm gonna be very honest, I don't know. Maybe we can I don't know if that's what's been linked there, right? So that's that doc, right? How do you do that? Where did all those discussions with regards to sorry, I forgot which one, but whatever provider you mentioned, right, happen? So can we move that without losing that? If it's just moving the whole thing, and then you delete this and we lose all that history, then I think that's a bad move.
Yeah, but I like with some of these docs, I'm not entirely sure there was a massive history there with them,
Yeah, I don't know. That's why I'm more like focused on what the idea was, and if we can preserve that, I'm all for it. I don't care how we achieve it.
Right, but I guess for example, the example you gave, correct, with the external DNS, like I guess in that doc, it's actually captured why you didn't use that. So you have kind of the history of the conversation already in the doc, and if there's not a lot of history inside the history of the doc, then we can just move that doc over. I think that's okay. But I would also say that could also just be a link to that doc. I don't think it's very important. But I guess Alex's point is, it's not just having the outcome of it is not the most interesting part. Actually having the conversations. Also, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I kind of get that. I just think for most of these, a lot of conversation would have happened in like Slack.
Yeah, we should not use Slack.
Right. So I just don't think we're going to lose a lot by moving it. Right. Is what I'm saying for that particular one. Right. But I take your point, Alex, which is if there is a lot of conversation related to a GitHub issue that resulted in this proposal, then you want to keep track of that in some way. Is what I'm taking from what you're saying.
And maybe even that can be moved, right? So I know I don't know what all the tools are now that GitHub lets you. Can you move a PR? Most probably not, I guess, but maybe I'm wrong. Yeah.
So
it's more. Yeah, the outcome. The recording of however we got to the outcome, like freezing the outcome, moving it somewhere, and then like as Thomas said, we can also do that and then link to the original thing so that it doesn't get lost, right? The PR link for the RFC could be this other PR, this other doc, or whatever. Just we make it work so that we don't lose that track. But like moving the thing, then deleting the original thing and losing all the history, I think would not be wise.
Okay.
If there is a lot of history.
If there's a lot of history, yeah. So I guess, Paul, the answer here is we don't update it. We should probably, if anything new comes along that is referencing like the architecture overview or something like that, then it would obviously be talking about the up-to-date and how it works. But sorry, Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I realize this is another thing, this non-up-to-date thing. So moving it would be one thing. I think one thing that I would like, it's a personal thing, I'm willing to be, like, have my mind changed on it, but stuff that makes it into the RFC folder that is then numbered, quote unquote, and so forth. I think it's desirable that it reflects reality. It would be other than maybe doing what you said, Craig, right? Which is, I don't know, we put like a huge outdated there or whatever, just make it so that it's clear where things are that reflect reality, and then other that were just discussion. Normally in the RFC process, the idea that would be one that doesn't get merged, but the PR still is there and can be looked up by others, right? But yeah, so just that we don't create a mess out of this folder, I guess, is what I'm arguing for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like some things are going to get out of date, right? And like you need a way of
purely technically the answer to that is no, though. Yeah, no, I get it.
In the real world.
Yeah, documentation is just a lie always. But yeah, so the idea is that technically, normally anything that addresses like that changes. So an RFC that has a user-facing thing, if it needed to be changed, it would be superseded by another RFC that introduces the change migration path and so forth, right?
Okay,
So
I've got an idea on this. Like, what if we move something like this over? Like, if there's history there, we link to that, but then we create a follow-up issue, which we also link to, which is to actually update this issue with reality, right? Which is at least we're not losing track of it, and it's linked to by the RFC as saying, hey, it's currently out of date, but we've got a plan to update it at some point, and go from there. I was kind of kicking the can down the road. I realize that, Alex, but it's
I know what this means, right? It'll never happen.
It's at least a paper trail.
No, yeah. Again, my point again being right. If we merge it to there, and I'm really insisting there on the RFC folder inside that repo, right? Maybe we could create another, like, I don't know, discarded ones or whatever you want. I don't care. But if it makes it inside that very folder, I think it's important that at the top somewhere, somehow it says whatever you read down there is non-applicable. Is all I care about.
Yeah. So that's like the status thing, right?
Yeah. For instance.
Yeah, I think in some way I'm just resonating the things you guys already said, but please let me know if there's something useful here. At least the way I see the RFCs, they are not to be understood as documentation of something already implemented, right? So that is not documentation of a feature implemented, period. It's more like a way to communicate an intention or to formalize some standards for whenever we actually commit to implementing that, right? So I think only if we had an extra status thing that tells, which is usually the case for RFCs in general, right? Usually have RFCs that are in the stage of proposed or accepted, or it became kind of an actual standard in the industry. It doesn't have to be as complex as that, but at least to differentiate between the ones that have been completely rejected or are currently still being discussed, or and the ones that actually became a standard, even if it's only for ourselves.
Yeah, like proposed, accepted, obsolete, like would probably cover most cases. Right?
I like the idea of the proposal being more like an RFC, and that it doesn't get too tangled up in the weeds of implementation. So then, as the implementation evolves, the RFC doesn't go out of date, and instead the implementation details can be weeded out in the actual past, like in the issues or whatever that we create as a result of the RFC being accepted.
That's not what it is right now.
No, right. So that's kind of what's made me think that is the DNS health checks proposal. I had to keep going back and updating the proposal to match the way the implementation had changed over time. But the actual feature being delivered didn't change, right? It was just the technical implementation was evolving. So if the health check proposal was more like an RFC that just described the feature, but then the specific implementation details were left for the tasks that were created as a result of that. That back and forth would have been avoided, right?
Go for it, Alex.
Yeah. So
my hand up.
okay. So yes. So that's not what you just described. What the RFC idea was, or is as of today. So one, we can completely drop it. That's absolutely an option. That being said, the whole RFC process itself is subject to RFC, and it was actually the RFC or RFCs or whatever, which is the one that described this. I understand, not everybody in this call was, let's say, involved in all this at the times. But so my take on this at a meta level was feel free to just create a PR that updates the RFC template and or process to reflect the reality. Now, so that's one. That's at the meta level. Now I hear what you just said with, yeah, let's YOLO whatever, spec something up in the cloud and then try to implement it and everything changes. But that's how you end up with docs, I guess. I don't know, I wasn't there. Like the DNS stuff where then it doesn't reflect reality, right? And I understand it's a hard equilibrium to find, but how do I do a minimal implementation detail, POCing or whatever you want to call it, to be able to make a case for how my thing would work and how it gets surfaced to a user? So that's now my personal thing. But certainly on the RFC thing, I'm it's there, it's open for debate, open a PR, change it or whatever. But if you want to have the idea is to document the process to the process, right? So,
and everybody does this a bit differently too, right? Kubernetes have an enhancement repo, which is kind of like the RFC repo, and they create PR and then they review it, and in that is a lot of technical detail about how is it going to work and what you're going to do and what's the testing going to look like and etc. And I guess it has to be reviewed by at least one owner of that particular area, and then it gets merged, and then the implementation happens. And I don't know if they go back and change and update it afterwards, but when Mike and I were working on DNS policy and on the DNS record structure, we started with a proposal high level, how do we think this should work? And then as we implemented, we we went back and we updated the proposal based on the new knowledge that we've gained. Now, maybe it speaks to we need to do a little bit more POCing and before like considering a proposal ready to be merged, right? Like maybe there needs to be an identified as part of something that needs a proposal or an RFC. Is, well, does it need a POC first, right? Or do we understand enough about it that actually we feel like we don't need to do a POC and we can just implement? And maybe that would help so that you have a status of proposed, but it's not accepted yet because there's no POC done. POC gets done, the RFC gets updated, and then the RFC gets merged, and that should reduce the number of changes needed. Ideally, reduce the number of changes needed afterwards.
Yeah, I would say that sounds very slow.
It is slow.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like the idea that basically probably, I mean, because the other way around, like closing it completely and then starting to work, that's just basically waterfall, right? And it's like fooling ourselves. So there's always things you're not going to know. So I would say most of the time, probably the RFC won't actually be finished until the pull request of the actual code is merged, kind of. And that could, and yes, you could have to step in between of a POC, but that would slow us down so much. And I don't know. And maybe Alex has completely different opinion on this, but that's what I'm thinking.
I already thought the RFC process was quite like some process. We're thinking about adding more to it. So yeah, my usual default would be, oh, let's not do that. Again, like if we propose any kind of proposal, but I guess the TLDR for me would be like, if we think this RFC process as documented there isn't a fit, and let's just throw it out, right? But like if we just, what makes me uncomfortable is we're looking at trying to have processes fit a bill or whatever for the sake of it. It's it's weird, but it's like human laws, right? We control them. We can undo them, redo them, and so forth. So yes, as you said, like Greg, like other people do it differently. I made that proposal based on stuff that I knew of and have been involved with. So again, I think it's reference, right? It's from the directly from the Pony language work where I've been somewhat involved with, and that themselves were very much and like looked at what the Rust team did. So again, all that can be, and including, you know what, let's drop this, it makes no sense, it's too much, blah, 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 that's cool too, right? So, but let's not try to fit sort of walk around things or whatever. If those things don't make sense, we get rid of them. Sorry, Paul.
Yeah, just for me personally, I really like the RFC process. I think the issue that Phil mentioned earlier is an issue for any proposal, regardless of what process you're following, right? We have the same thing with Epic Briefs, Google Documents. There's a proposal and the implementation is completely different and we just don't go back and update them. So I don't think this is a problem with the process specifically for RFC. I think this is just a general problem when it comes to proposals and updating them afterwards. So for me, I'd like to continue with that process. I think the question that I'm raising here is more about the existing proposals that we have that didn't necessarily follow this process from the start and what we'd like to do with them.
Yeah, we went a bit off the rails there.
Yeah, no, it was a good, yeah, we did. I think I would probably just leave where it is. If it's not relevant and but it has relevant information, but isn't really an RFC, then maybe we just leave it there for now, and just move the ones that are relevant as an RFC right now.
Yeah, and I guess leaving them in the repo means they're still there if we ever want to go back and reference.
Still got the history. Yeah, we haven't lost anything.
Okay, so the outcome I'm hearing then is, unless we think that it is applicable to migrate something over to fit the RFC process, if it becomes more complex, just leave it the way it is.
Yeah. And I think Just on the RFC process, I think it is interesting to have the RFC for like user-facing changes, but maybe the PR stays open, and we add that this is kind of leading from all this conversation. We have that status where it's like implementable, but the PR is still open, and then the code gets implemented, and that gives opportunity for that PR to be updated, and then they both merge together.
It feels to me like there's some crossing of boundaries in terms of the responsibilities of each sort of part of that, like feature delivery there, where the RFC to me is something that's not yet been implemented or even approved as a thing that's worth time working on, right? And then there's the tasks that are, this thing is ready to be worked on and needs to be put into iterations or whatever. And then finally, there's documentation. This is how that thing was built and how it should be used, right? And to me, it feels like the RFC staying open until the end of the process, so that it's like also accurate documentation and accurate implementation. We then have to duplicate essentially the content in the RFC that's getting updated into updating the issues to make sure the implementation is actually implemented correctly. And then also we duplicate the RFC into the documentation as well, right? Where if instead the RFC was more of a description of the feature and the issues were more of a description of how to implement, and then the documentation, to me, the documentation could be the thing that is updated as the implementation changes, rather than back to the RFC. I don't know if what I'm saying really makes a lot of sense.
I go for it.
So the idea and what I was trying to convey in that doc is to find that middle ground I was talking about before, right? Understand enough about the implementation for the things that will impact the end user, right? So things like low-level details or whatever, like we had this in the RLPv2, we had some of that in the well-known attribute one as well, where it was specifically said, like, those are implementation details and we don't care because they will not impact the user, or we have ways to mitigate so that they're not user-facing, right? The idea is to get to that understanding properly, agreement amongst the group, and then to work on it. So I wouldn't want to see what Phil described neither. Like the day that all of those, like this seems to be like a little bit too much pain. But the idea was, yeah, that to feel that the group as a whole has enough understanding about how to proceed and expose a given feature to an end user in a meaningful way.
But that goes into technical detail, right?
It makes sense to me to have the RFC defining like the API and sort of what kind of output is going to look like, and like general processes. That I think really I feel like me and Alex are actually saying the same thing now at this point.
Just, and I don't know, asking this out because everybody talked about the RFC. I don't know if everybody read the actual proposal on how it's supposed to work. So it comes in two phases: the thing that describes the process the best I could, and a template that is supposed to help you starting an RFC. And that's what I was talking about before. If we feel that this needs to be changed, like that's where the FC process actually works just as much, right? You can just go about and saying, okay, this is what we said, but given foobar, it doesn't make sense or is less than optimal. And here's a way that we can make that better. Like everybody's more than welcome to open a PR to change the RFC process, right? So anyways, repeating myself, but and as well, if one says, let's close this freaking thing down, it makes no sense, like that works too.
I do think if it becomes the center of activity that we will need to refine it, because at the moment I think 2 PRs have merged and there's like 12 open. Like that's not a situation that's very
Well, I don't think it
Okay.
says anything about the process, to be honest. I know it's annoying for people that PRs are open, but some work that's there is just, again, records all the stuff. Nobody's working on them, you know, like, so to me,
Right.
it's not necessary. Maybe some of them should be closed. I think one I would want to close. Well, we had this discussion. I think I could close 3 of mine and like reopen, like, in maybe that would be a good idea. But that's a different, I think, problem. But yeah, the point that I wanted to make though is I think maybe instead of focusing on the stuff that has happened, maybe living the thing firsthand for the next feature or whatever will make things more real, and then the actual pain points more real, rather than looking at how do we port old docs to that format, which again is not even supposed to be a one-on-one match.
Okay. There's been a few like a few different iterations of this in different orgs. Like there was also like in managed application services, we tend to use ADRs for the product stuff. And that's another interesting area. Like that's less user impacting stuff and more like architectural decisions. So also, like, where does that stuff get captured? Should probably be in the architecture repo somewhere as ADR rather than RFC, if RFC is user facing. Anyway, lots of interesting things to debate. I'm also keen to avoid overburdening the process. Okay, Paul, did you get the answer you wanted to? Sorry, we went down like a lot of rabbit holes there.
Yeah, I definitely have the answer to what I was asking, which is I don't have to do anything, so I'm good with it. But yeah, in general, I do think with respect to the number of open PRs against the Arc repo right now, I think that's just down to the fact that we don't have any owner, a champion for that architecture repo to try and get them closed out, I'm guessing. So perhaps that's a potential action item we should try to follow up on.
But I don't think there's one owner. Every RFC has its own owner. It's a shared thing, right? That's how I understood it.
Right, but am I understanding correctly that it's the hold up is that lack of approval from others for the open PR, or is it more a case that the open PRs have been reviewed and we're just waiting for the people who submitted the PR to make the changes?
No, I think it's a throughput problem.
Right, people don't have enough time to read, or
no, they do all the things, even make progress
Yeah.
on them, right? So some of bunch of mine I can talk about are about the hierarchical policy attachment, right? So policy inheritance and so forth. We're not doing any of that right now. We purposefully left that out. So I think that's gonna come back whether we want it or not, right? Other than we say, okay, then we don't do those. We only do direct policy attachment, in which case all of those can be closed as like non-applicable, right? But until that call is made, I don't see. So again, if there is a metric that we think is important, that there are not that many open PRs, and that's maybe a problem. But I don't see where it's a problem. It's non-addressed things, and things that as a group we've decided to not address for now.
Yeah, I think it's important to see the difference between an open pull request for a code base that implements a new feature. If that stays open very long, yes, that's smell. But this is just an ongoing conversation. This is about the conversation. This is in the end should be the essence of an agile process, which is about people talking with each other about things. And some of those things are about future things. So we decide not to talk about it for now because it's not relevant right now. I agree. It's not so relevant to count open pull requests here, I think.
And maybe what we could do is add a label to them that for now, like we just ignore those or whatever, postponed or needs discussion, or we have a few. I mean, I'm fine with that as well, but I don't. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, and Thomas has another interesting point there, is that RFCs will never, well, based on the process that's there, they should never lead to conflict in code, right? So in the merging itself. they should be absolutely conflict free. Yeah, they may conflict in what we say in them that's wrong in the meantime, but yeah, there is no conflict, so whatever one should never be an issue of merging.
Yeah, so perhaps I was just misunderstanding what the issue was. I thought it was more a case that they were just being split and just being left alone.
Okay. We are basically on time.
This was your little point, Paul?
In fairness, I didn't spark off a lot of this conversation.
Right. I don't think there's anything else burning in the backlog here right now, so and I think we're probably okay. Key, does your one need discussion right now, or are you okay to wait or take it up on Slack?
No, I'm happy to take that offline. No problem. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Let's leave it there then. Thank you very much.
Cheers.